Today, we're going to do cost principles, allowable, allocable, and reasonable. And today we have our RSA program officer joining us and guru of cost principles, Mr. August Martin. August, would you introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. I don't know about guru, but I guess that's just a polite way of saying he's been around for a while. My name is August Martin. I am the program officer for Rehabilitation Service Administration's AIVRS program. I've been here in Washington, D.C. for nearly 18 years. I've been working with American Indian Folk Rehab since 1999. It's good to be here. I hope that we can share some information that's beneficial to you and helps you in your day-to-day operation.
Thanks, August. And most of you know me, I'm Wayne, Director of AVRTAC. And I've not been around quite as long as August. And I'm not going to pretend like I know anything about cost principles. I just spend money freely. I'm just kidding. We work on
and
this.
That's on the record, so we got that on record.
Well, see, I got editing power, so we're okay there.
Okay.
August and I are going to go through this, and again, we're going to try and make this as fun as possible. But it's cost principles. When we were developing the presentation, we had to keep hollering at each other over the Zoom to wake up. So we're going to do the best we can to make it enjoyable. All right, so we're going to look at the learning outcomes. We're hoping that at the end of this webinar, you're going to be able to navigate the Code of Federal Regulations that are governing guiding project service provision. We want to make sure that everybody is aware and hope that we're clear enough on the regulations that we are using. Attendees will develop an understanding of appropriate spending guidelines for direct service provision to project participants. So we're going to be talking about some very specific material or CFR that guide the service provision to those people. And the attendees will be able to better evaluate current strategic plans to ensure cost principles are adhered to in the management of the grant funds. So this last one, we really hope this presentation is going to give you the opportunity to look at your current situation in your project and make some changes if you need to address the service provision, your policies and procedures, pretty much everything that is involved with serving that individual as on their journey to employment. Okay, so I'm going to let August take over.
All right, so we are looking at the Uniform Administrative Requirements. You will hear us at RSA refer them to Uniform Guidance. It is at 2 CFR 200, and the Uniform Administrative Requirements are broken down into a number of different sections. Now, the section that we typically take a look at when we are asked questions about allowability is under 2 CFR 200, 420 through 476. And we may take a look at some of those later on. Throughout the Uniform Administrative Requirements, you'll see definitions, you'll see define what allowability is, allocable and reasonable. We will get to those at some point. And then it also spells out a policy, how we should develop our policy, which is what we are looking at now on the screen, which is under 2 CFR 200.400 or 400. And the policy guide really is giving you the framework by which you are going to administer your grants. Now, as you read through these, which I'm not going to read through them for you, if I did that, I would lose at least 2/3 of you just to sleep. This is definitely dry regulations. We always recommend you bring something to drink if you're going to go through this stuff. It can be dry, but 2 CFR 200 lays out the policies for a non-federal entity, which is you, a grantee, a recipient of a federal award under a specific program. Or this one is the American Indian Vocational Rehabilitation Services Program. and how those policies should be implemented. So under 200.400 is basically saying that you are going to implement your grant in an effective and an efficient manner, consistent with the activities that you described in your grant application, and in a manner consistent with, which is legal terms, with the policies that your tribe and you have developed to accomplish the goals and objectives that you promised that you would accomplish. So your tribe as an organization needs to put together policies that will ensure that the grant is administered in a way that meets its goals and objectives and follows the statutory and regulatory requirements of the program. Can we go to the next slide? As you can see here, every non-federal entity is required to follow specific accounting practices. And 2 CFR 200 makes reference to what was government acceptable. Oh man, I would have a brain fart right on a webinar. It's basically GAP. It's government accounting principles that are widely accepted. So to that end, your tribe is required to put a cost allocation plan with an indirect cost proposal. Indirect cost is going to be charged against the grant. You as a project director don't need to be involved in that cost allocation plan, but you do have to understand what indirect cost is if your tribe is going to charge indirect costs against your grant. Student research does not apply to this since it's listed under 2 CFR 200.400. And then finally, any monies made off of the grant cannot be kept. It has to be turned back into the program, which is what we call program income. 2 CFR 200 does have specific citations specifically addressing program income. Every one of you, when you received your first grant award notification for a brand new grant, will have a large amount of paperwork attached to it. And in one of those papers or documents includes a discussion about program income. And it's stating that any monies generated from program activities will be put right back into the program. Next slide. I'm going to read this one off because it is important. 2 CFR 200.401. These principles must be used in determining the allowable costs of work performed by the non-federal entity, the grantee, under federal awards. These principles must be used by the non-federal entity as a guide in the pricing of fixed price contracts and subcontracts where costs are used in determining the appropriate prices. Now, this would segue into, if we had more time, this would segue into our discussion about procurement practices, but we're not going to get into that at the moment. Next slide. So factors affecting allowability of costs. Wayne, do you want to take that one?
Oh, sure. Factors that affect it, they have to be necessary and reasonable for the performance of the federal award, and they must be allocable under these principles. Again, I don't want to sit and read every line. I'm sure we can all read, and we'll be sharing this material later. So I'm just going to kind of summarize what this is. It has, so when you're looking at what factors are affecting the allowability, it's pretty much basically what somebody would, outside of like a federal entity, would look at spending as far as being allowable, right? So it has to be consistent with your policies and procedures. It has to be applied uniformly across all federally financed and other activities of that non-federal entity or grantee. You can't use your funds for cost sharing or matching requirement. There has to be, you have to do that on from another method, you have to always document everything. And you have to stay within your budget period, which is really, you know, a bummer that we can't just go across all of our 5 years and spend all of our money in 1 year, right? Like, it's one of those situations where we have to spend it within that budget period. One thing I want to kind of expand on is with number D, a cost may not be assigned to a federal award as a direct cost if any other cost incurred for the same purpose in like circumstances has been allocated to the federal award as an indirect cost. So we have to really be careful in making sure that we are equal across, you know, there's got to be a consistency across all of the projects in the funding. You want to add anything to that, August?
Yeah, when it talks about the allocability or using funds that would otherwise be associated with an indirect cost, I think it's very important really for you to have a better understanding of what is included in the indirect cost rate agreement that the tribe charges against your grant. One of the reasons why we at RSA request a copy of your indirect cost rate agreement with every annual performance report is so you can actually get a copy for yourself, read it, and understand what has been negotiated, what can be charged against it. So if a cost can be charged to indirect cost, or then it should not be charged to your direct cost line item. So
And then just to be clear, we have to use, or we want you to understand that the necessary and reasonable terms that we use in all this language are actual legal terms found in throughout 2 CFR 200.
Yeah, and we will definitely get to that. We do have a definition for you in a later slide, but suffice it to say, though, taking a look at all of this, you would think that the provision of services is cut and dry. You're going to know exactly what you need to do at every given time. But what we're going to show you here through this presentation is that quite often the answer invariably ends up with us using the word, well, it depends. We work in a profession where we have to deal with a lot of gray areas. And always the best option you have to avoid any kind of misuse of funds or accidentally paying for something you shouldn't have is to talk to your program officer. We understand that this is a very, very deep subject. We're not going to get through everything at the through this presentation, but we are going to introduce you to quite a bit. So even though these are set in stone, concrete, this is what you have to do. Oftentimes when you do send us questions, we do have to take a look at the context in which those questions are submitted to us. So anyway,
So
let's go ahead and
August,
move on.
we do have a question in the chat box.
Sure.
Alaska has many grants for entrepreneurs, and this requires cost sharing or matching. As we read this allowability, does this mean TVR cannot use funding to share or match in the grant?
I need to read that again. Okay, let me read it. Alaska has many grants. Oh, many grants for entrepreneurs. TVR cannot use funding to share or match in the mini grants. I think that's definitely a discussion you would have to have with your program officer. Without knowing the context of those mini grants or how they're administered and how the relationship is developed between the state and the tribe regarding those mini grants, I wouldn't do you justice by answering you flat out on that question. Sorry if it sounds like I'm dodging it, but I just don't have enough information really to answer yes or no to that question.
That's kind of what I was going with. You just said it depends, right? That's one of the comments that we'll get back is is it depends. And so I really see that this is one of those moments where it depends. It could be, or it could not be allowable. So with more context than with your program officer, you're going to be able to discuss what that means and what that looks like.
Because at first glance, it would appear that you're looking at um, um, services to groups, which is determined under Section 103B of the Rehabilitation Act. I think we would have to take a look at that, see whether it fits into that. And also, we need to know what the context of the mini grants are, how they're administered, and how the relationship between the state and the tribe is. So, yeah, it depends. Unfortunately, that's a great question. It sounds like a great opportunity.
Yeah, it's kind of run through several different options in my own head as I was reading it. So that would be one that I'd like to kind of discuss later too.
Yeah, yeah.
More time. We did have a question in here. Can you lose your grant funds or can you lose your grant if funds are misused?
Depends on how the grantee, which is the tribe, addresses such misuse. Usually, it ends up being an individual who misuses those funds, and the tribe would end up having to pay that money back. We would definitely put the tribe on a corrective action plan to ensure such embezzlement wouldn't happen again, or misuse of funds, or however you want to define that. Just a quick thing. I did have to serve as an expert witness in a trial about 15 years ago against a project director. That individual ended up having to serve some time and pay back monies because it did become a federal issue. So, misuse of funds. If you allowed a cost but did not know it was unallowable, then we would definitely work with you. We're not trying to get you arrested. But many of the times when we at RSA are asked the question about allowability, we do our research, we dig into this statutory regulatory requirements, and we try to include citation when we're answering your question. So in the future, if you are asked about it from a single auditor, somebody conducting a single audit, or you're visited by a federal agent, at least you'll have some documentation or an answer for them regarding some of those issues. So if you don't pay it back, or if evidence is mounted that what is ongoing and there's no evidence that you're going to change those behaviors, then yes, you may lose your grant. But otherwise, most of the time, a misuse of funds is either an accident or non-malicious. So we will work with you.
So again, it depends.
Yeah.
All right. So in other words, when that all the CFR stuff, the language can get confusing, and so we kind of brought it together in some more understandable language. A cost is allowable if it is permitted as a cost by the federal statute and regulations. If it's included in the budget of the project's approved grant application or in an RSA approved budget modification. If it's part of the services identified in a participant's IPE, and if it's permitted by the grantee's TVR policies and or tribal policies. So that's really what allows it to be allowable or makes it allowable. Sorry, I apparently I'm not putting words together very well today. I apologize for that. This is what helps people look at it and determine if it's allowable when you're determining what services the individual is requesting. Again, going back to your grant budget, if it's the approved application, it's obviously going to be an allowable cost, or in your budget mod that RSA approves. Okay, so we do have another question. Explain the cost sharing with state VR or other programs. I hear it a lot.
Cost share with are you asking whether or not states have a cost share requirement? If that's the question, then yes, they do have a 20% cost share requirement against their grant, which is the formula grant based off of the population of the state and the estimated number of individuals with disabilities in that state. So they have to go through a formula. If that's the question, then yes, they do have a pretty significant cost share requirement. If that's not the question, I apologize for misinterpreting what that might be. Okay, reasonable costs. I'm going to read this one because it would be kind of hard to paraphrase this without saying exactly the same thing. A cost is reasonable if, in its nature and amount, it does not exceed that which would be incurred by a prudent person under the circumstances prevailing at the time the decision is made to incur the cost. The question of
Okay.
reasonableness is particularly important when the non-federal entity is predominantly federally funded. So I think prudent person, I think, is one of the key words in determining whether or not a cost is reasonable. So if you're taking a look at an individual IPE and they have a service request, and you take a look at the costs associated with that specific request, you have to take a look at that reasonableness as to whether or not a prudent person or somebody under the same situation in a different setting in the same state would come to the same conclusion as you would. If they would come to the same conclusion that you would regarding the cost, and it seems like it's something that you would do or allow or provide, that would lend its support towards it being reasonable. All right, next slide. Required considerations. It's really hard to work through these again without really regurgitating a lot of it from the law. You're required to recognize whether or not it's an ordinary and necessary for the operation of the project. Is it required for you to implement and operate your project on a day-to-day basis? Are there restraints associated or connected with the grants, such as the terms and conditions that are listed in your grant award notification? The restraints for requirements, sound business practice, arm's length bargaining, federal, state, local, tribal, and other law and regulations, terms and conditions of federal award, market price for comparable goods or services, whether the individuals concerned acted with prudence, and whether or not federal entity significantly deviates from its established practices. So when we look at your budgets and we take a look at your budget narrative, we are taking a look at whether or not these factors are met, or whether it are not met, are considered when you're determining your cost allocation to all your line items. And if we do have a question, and some of you who have received grants in the last 5 years will recognize that we do submit or talk to you about some of those costs. And then we ask specific questions. Well, is it a part of your sound business practices? What's the market price for such and this? Is there something that's more reasonable than the market price? Or, for example, if you wanted to purchase a vehicle versus renting a vehicle or leasing a vehicle. So yeah, we take a look at these factors, or whether or not your costs are meeting some of these requirements or these factors.
So on this slide, I like to point out one thing, and that's the market prices for comparable goods or services, and specifically for the geographic area. This is a big question that we get a lot of times from the AVERS projects. You guys come to us and you're like, well, this is way more expensive here, or I can get it cheaper here. Which one how do I go about this? Can we guide services? What are the policies for purchasing this, that type of thing? So it really does come back to your area. Like in remote Alaska, prices are a lot more expensive because of the cost of shipping. And so it's okay to pay those higher expenses, even though we're supposed to be the payer of last resort and use all comparable benefits up front. If those things don't come into play and the cost is still high, it's okay to pay for those higher cost services because of your geographical area. It's going to be a little bit different for somebody that's, either let's say, in a more urban area, they might be able to shop around and get some more prices that are better aligned with their budget. So it's all part of the same thing that we can adjust and be flexible with, as long as you have that documentation again. So like we've always said, tell the story, gather the documentation, show the market price and all that fun stuff. Naomi just posted that a medium-sized freezer can cost up to $1,800 to get out to their people. That includes on 2 cargo airlines. So costs can be quite different and expensive. And as long as you can tie it to the needs of your geographic area, it's an allowable cost or reasonable cost.
Right. You'll often hear us when you send us a request to approve a certain expenditure that's meets the $5,000 threshold for equipment. One thing we will always ask you to send to us as a part of your justification or explanation as to the need for the expenditure is to include a phrase or to answer the phrase, will this cost cause undue, not that's not what I say. How do I phrase it? God, 2 brain farts in one recording. That's just crazy.
We're quite the team, August. You can't think and I can't talk, so we're gonna get through this together.
Yeah. Oh, it was just on the tip of my tongue. I had it. It was so eloquent. My deepest apologies. I'll have to come back to you on that one because yeah, I'll come back to you on that one because it's just not coming back to my head right now. I can see everybody's trying to help me out on it. So we'll come back to that. I will have the phrase for you. It's going to pop in, hopefully not at 3 a.m. tonight, but it'll pop in there. So let's move on to the next slide.
And we got some questions in the chat box. I'm going to keep moving forward with these slides. We're gonna watch the chat box, and then at the end we're going to leave 30 minutes for Q&A. So we're going to address some of those questions in the chat box once we get to the end of the slides.
It just hit me. It just hit me. We do ask for the phrase, you need to provide assurance that the cost will not adversely affect the provision of VR services to all eligible individuals that's already receiving the services. So when you're looking at reasonable costs, you also need to take a look at whether or not it's going to adversely affect how you're providing services to all your other eligible individuals. And if a cost is, if an expenditure is, you're looking at $15,000 for a freezer, which may very well be necessary, you may have to look for additional comparable benefits or services to help pay for that. So you have to take into consideration how you're providing service to everybody else too. I know through experience that some of our consumers do like to think they're the only one receiving services out of the program, but we do have to take everybody into consideration. So that's a part of that prudent thinking, whether or not a prudent person in the same situation will make the same decision. So.
Okay. So in other words, right, again, trying to take this language and bring it into an understandable concept. A way to think of reasonable costs is that they must be able to withstand public scrutiny, meaning that prudent individuals not working with the project would agree that the costs are appropriate for the intended purpose. So again, just building on what August was just talking about. Other considerations are whether the cost is necessary to complete grant activity, and whether the cost is consistent with established grantee policies and procedures. So again, a lot of the questions I've been just kind of cruising over in the chat box that are coming up are going to be answered by the grantees' policies and procedures. Reasonable and necessary refers to the comparable level of charges for similar treatment, services, and supplies in the geographic area where treatment, services, or supplies are provided or performed. Okay, so again, reasonable and necessary comes into play, and it refers to, are all the costs for a psych eval in your area similar? Or when you break it all down and you look at the big picture, would it be cheaper to send that individual into town to get a psych eval? Or would it be more cost efficient to bring that person out to your location to do the psych eval? So it's just a thought process that we have to go through when we're determining services to make sure that it's reasonable.
Yeah, I think you have to take into consideration usability and quality when taking a look at it's cheaper doesn't always mean better, obviously. And there's a lot you have to take into consideration when determining an allowable or reasonable cost. Quality and usability obviously is one of the biggest ones. And I think the other question that we've always run into is whether or not tribe can use sole sourcing for certain equipment or purchases. Again, that's a one-on-one conversation with your program officer that I'm not going to attempt to answer in here, but that's something that might come up later as well. But looking at the quality, looking at the usability versus looking at protecting your monies is always kind of a fine balance you have to take. It's a tightrope. Either way you fall on that will determine the type of services you're providing to your individuals. So I know that doesn't answer a lot of questions, but it's just something you have to take into consideration when thinking about reasonableness.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
So we got some examples, just to kind of wrap up allowable and reasonable cost. So some allowable costs are costs for VR counselor salaries and fringe, costs for desktop computers for each staff member, 2 new vehicle tires as identified in the IPE, costs for physical capacity assessment for eligibility determination, costs for the production of flyers used for outreach. And remember that word outreach when you're looking at spending money on flyers, and then costs for staff to travel to KNR conferences. So then we look at the reasonable costs, the cost to replace one staff computer that is outdated, and it doesn't have the capacity to run software. That's a reasonable cost. A $400 purchase order to assist a participant to obtain appropriate work clothing and boots for a construction job. Specialized or certification, vocational training, materials and supplies for a participant to complete the training. August, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think kind of gives the gist. I will say though that in the chat I did see that Janine Wynn wants to do a intake on you and me for services. So yeah, we could definitely benefit from your services. So feel free to send us an application and we'll apply for your services. Otherwise, there was another question in here about licenses, staff professional licenses.
Yeah,
Now, under 34 CFR 371.41, I think it is. It does allow for the use of grant funds to be used for professional development. So a license would fall into that. And again, you have to weigh in the day-to-day operation of your project against such costs. I think it's worth it. Any training or additional licenses you can help your staff get that will help provide services to individuals or our indigenous peoples with disabilities, I think the better. I think it's well worth the sacrifice of some of the grant resources to pay for that, to increase the quality of services and to reach people that that we don't normally get a chance to work with. So absolutely, but again, weigh those costs against what your budget looks like. If it's not written in your grant, as far as the money set aside for staff development, then just talk to your program officer. I don't think you'd have a problem getting an approval for that, as long as it specifically relates to your job and assisting your participants in your project. All right, allocable. Allocable basically is how you assign certain amount of monies to any specific or given line item. When you submit your grant application, you are given a budget form with specific line items, salary, fringe, travel, contractual, other, there's just a number of different line items. And so allocable is how you assign certain amount of monies per those line items. And there are standards that must be met. Is encouraged specifically for the federal award, benefits both the federal award and other work of the non-federal entity, and can be distributed in a proportion that may be approximated using reasonable methods and is necessary to the overall operation of the non-federal entity or your grant, and is assignable in part to the federal award in accordance with the principles in this subpart. Next, or do we have a question? I keep seeing
So
these.
we'll gather all the correct questions at the end.
Excuse me, I had to cough and I didn't want to cough in your ear. So here we're talking about indirect cost again. We can get that into that in more in depth and maybe I don't know if Wayne, if you actually have a webinar specific for indirect costs, but we don't have to really dig deep into that right now.
Oh, that's a great idea to have one for indirect.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about that in our webinar that we did on project management. And that recording is on our YouTube channel, but we didn't do a deep dive into it. So you're right, that would be a good idea, Wayne.
Now, as far as allocable costs, the second bullet point says any cost allocable to a particular federal award under the principles provided for in this part may not be charged to other federal awards to overcome fund deficiencies. So if you find that you're running out of monies, the tribe cannot dip into other grant funds to pay for activities that are specific to your grant. Now they can use their general funds and they can assign that as cost share matching requirement. Otherwise, they would also have to tell us that's what they are doing. But yeah, you can't use other federal awards to pay for your grant activities if you're running out of money. So direct cost allocation principles, we can discuss that case by case basis, and contractual. Again, that's a case by case basis. You would need to talk to your program officer one-on-one on those.
Right, so for a cost to be allocable to the grant award, it must be included in the budget of the approved grant application or budget modification that's been approved by RSA program officer. And it must support or advance the activities of the project. So we can't just throw stuff in there that's not connected to the project or moving it towards successfully serving the people. Allocation also applies to assigning a cost to one or more grants or projects in direct proportion to each project's use or benefit from the service or goods. And finally, allocable also relates to assigning a cost to the appropriate fiscal category or line items in the grantee's budget. You want to
Okay.
add anything, August, or are we good?
I think we're good. If we have any questions from there, we can address them at that time.
All right, so when we talk about examples, again, we wanted to connect it, the project's proportion of cost for use of the department's copier is an example of an allocable cost. The percentage of time that the shared tribal job developer spends assisting participants in job search activities for the TVR participants. The percentage of a department head salary related to the time spent supervising the project director and approving the project's purchase requests. Also project staff salaries and rent for a satellite office.
And, we did have an example earlier too, staff development, licensing, attending certain trainings, that could be allocable, but you have to choose a line item which to assign that cost to. I learned the hard way as a project director. I started as a project director for my tribe back in 1999. And in my first year, I made so many mistakes. It was like a comedy of errors. So, and one of the errors I made was trying to move monies out of one line item to pay for a cost that into another line item to pay for a cost that wasn't specifically associated with that line item. Trying to move monies out of my travel budget to pay for participant services, but I put it into like salary or into travel or something rather than putting it into other, which is where all of our consumer service dollars was allocated to. So you do have to have a pretty good understanding of how your funds are allocated. One thing we always say is that your grant application is your Bible. You need to know it from cover to cover. That's what you're being held to, and that's how your funds are allocated. That describes how your funds are allocated, not just in the budget and budget narrative, but your program narrative also describes to us how you're going to use your funds and gives us an idea of how those funds are allocated. It tells us the story of how you're going to use these monies to meet your goals and objectives.
All right.
All right. Does anybody need like water or something to drink? Because this is getting dry. These are examples of questions that we have received from our grantees. And we're just going to walk through these. I'm going to take this one. Wayne will take the next one, and we'll just kind of go through these. So this is under, again, like I said earlier, this, where you'll find a lot of your answers about allowability, allocability, or reasonableness will be in 2 CFR 200.420 through 476. And we did put citations for these ones here. Somebody asked for virtual snacks. Hey, I got virtual gummy bears if you want them. Question. The tribe is putting on an event, an awareness day or a powwow, or some do disability awareness days. And they want me to buy some water bottles, mugs, pencils, and thumb drives with the tribe's logo or the TVR project's name on it. Is it allowable? You would be surprised how often we do get this question. Unfortunately, the answer is no. According to 2 CFR 200.421E3, unallowable advertising and public relation costs include the following: costs of promotional items and memorabilia, including models, gifts, and souvenirs. That would include the water bottles, the mugs, pencils, the thumb drives with the tribe's logo or TVR project name on it. Now, just to throw a wrench or a wrinkle into this whole thing, if perchance you want to provide to your participants pencils, thumb drives, or even folders with paper in it, to help them in their progression through the VR process. As long as it doesn't have the name of the tribe or the project and is necessary for them to work through their VR process, that would be allowable. But the moment you put a name of the tribe or the project on there, it becomes a promotional item. And we all know water bottles and mugs really are not necessary for them to achieve their vocational goal. So, but overall, if it does have their name, the tribe or the project, it is an unallowable cost that it is considered a promotional item.
Okay, so the next example, we have a booth at the next powwow and need a banner to identify our project. Is it allowable? And again, no, according to 2 CFR 200.421 EI2EI. Sounds like I'm singing
E2I.
Old Town Had a Farm. It's unallowable advertising and public relations costs include the following: costs of meetings, conventions, convocations, or other events related to the other activities of the entity, including costs of displays, demonstrations, and exhibits.
Yeah, unfortunately, we kind of ran into this one. This regulation came out after the general administrative. Oh, I'm forgetting that. There's a department in the federal government that misused a lot of their funds, and because they misused a lot of their funds, they had to create a response to that misuse of their funds, which is, you can't use your funds to pay for promotional items, displays, demonstrations, exhibits. So leave it to the federal government to screw up so bad that they have to affect everybody. Okay, next. We have a participant who has a suspended license and they cannot have it reinstated until they pay the fines and court costs. Can we pay for those costs for the participant? And unfortunately, according to 2 CFR 200.426, no, you can't. That would be considered a bad debt, debts which have been determined to be uncollectible, including losses, whether actual or estimate, arising from uncollectible accounts, and other claims unallowable. Related collection costs and related legal costs arising from such debts after they have been determined to be uncollectible are also unallowable. And that would unfortunately include the costs, the court costs, the fine costs. So you want to add anything to that, Wayne?
Yeah, so again, this is a case-by-case situation that you would want to staff with your director and then even potentially talk to your program officer. It's a very thin line between like reinstatement fees, licensing fees versus the fees associated with the illegal activity or action. So for example, I worked with a lot of people at the time that had DUIs on their records. And so they would have to go through and pay all their fines, pay the DUI course program and all that stuff. That was all the things that they had to pay for out of their own money in order for VR to be able to step in and help with licensing fees once they had completed all that required activity. Even to the point where we did a few things with a case where we paid for the insurance for a month just so that they could save up the money to pay for their own insurance after that. But the individual had a job and it was a direct barrier to employment, and we were able to remove that barrier for them. So again, it's very case by case, and always talk to the directors or the supervisors, staff, meetings, whatever. And again, document while you're making those decisions.
And I think it is definitely acceptable for you to take a look at other costs associated with their IPE that the participant has agreed to pay for out of their own pocket, and for the VR program to assume those costs to free up resources for them to pay for things like reinstatement fees, fines, and court costs. So there's nothing that would prohibit you from doing that. That does require you to have a intimate knowledge of their case, so you understand what their costs are and what they've agreed to pay for. But yeah, it is definitely a case by case basis. And we can definitely, yeah, talk to your director or even talk to us at RSA, and we can help you come up with a decision that's going to keep you from getting an audit finding in the future. So next.
Okay, so we are attending a conference with other Avers projects in the state and would like to sponsor the speaker and provide some refreshments. Are we allowed to use grant funds to pay for these things? And according to 200.432, yes, you are. Because it's defined as a meeting, retreat, seminar, symposium, workshop, or event whose primary purpose is the dissemination of technical information beyond the non-federal entity and is necessary and reasonable for successful performance under the federal award. So that includes, under that caveat, it includes meals, rental or facilities rental, speakers fees, refreshments, even local transportation. So again, this is one of those ones that's case by case, and always consult with your program officer before agreeing to pay for food or beverage or refreshments. Just because we don't want you to get crossways of, like the audit findings.
Now, this also brings up something that we've been addressing here regarding speakers. Whether you have an elder coming in to speak or to provide some ceremony or share their life story or something, just speaker fees. And in the past, we've always struggled with how to allocate the funds to pay for honorariums. I think it's quite clear here when you're looking at the language here. It says allowable conference costs paid by the non-federal entity as a sponsor or host of the conference may include rental or facilities. And then the next one is speakers fees. And I think if you want to allocate, or if you want to provide some level honorarium to our elders, to our participants who are providing necessary services for our consumers, it would definitely fall into a speaker's fee. So consider that in the future when you do have elders speaking on behalf of your project and you want to provide an honorarium. I would allocate that or label that as a speaker's fee, and hopefully it would benefit them. So again, that's a case-by-case basis too. If you're looking at ceremonies and you're looking at the costs of wood or rocks or sage or sweetgrass or something to that effect, and that's going to be a case-by-case basis, and I strongly encourage you to talk to your program officer about that first. All right, next, our tribe is hosting a holiday party and they asked if our grants could sponsor the cost of a band. Can our grant pay for this? Sure. Wayne, you gave me all the no answers. You take the one yes answer. I get it.
That's right.
I see how you work on this. Make me the bad guy. I'm the Fed. Anyway, it says no, according to 2 CFR 200.438, costs of entertainment, including amusement, diversion, and social activities and any associated costs are unallowable, except where specific costs that might otherwise be considered entertainment have programmatic purpose and are authorized either in the approved budget for the federal award or with prior written approval of the federal awarding agency. So when you look at this language, what do you see? You see yes. Oh, you see a no, obviously. But there is a caveat. And that's why you need to talk to your program officer, because it says, except where specific costs that might otherwise be considered entertainment may have a programmatic purpose. So if you have a question as to whether or not it would have a programmatic purpose and would qualify for this caveat, then definitely talk to your program officer. If it's like just a local band coming into play, then yeah, we're going to say no, that doesn't have a programmatic purpose other than your amusement.
All right, so these are some of the questions that we've gotten from or at Avertac from people over the last couple of years. Are we allowed to pay for past debt for a participant? And again, we've already answered that, and that's no under 426 or 0.426. Can we pay for food for a participant or in a conference? It depends. Again, like we just covered under 200.432. Promotional items, no. And that's 421E3. Can we provide small business assistance for married couples, same business, both participants? And under 403, 403, yes, you can. And that's a more detailed discussion if we want to have. I'm willing to have that conversation, but just for this purpose, yes, you can. Just make sure that you aren't duplicating services between the two participants. Can we purchase gas vouchers if the vehicle isn't in their name? This is under 200.403. Again, it's a depends answer. There's some steps you have to take to do that, but it is allowable if it removes a barrier to employment or medical necessity or disability related causes. Can we pay for an item for a participant that we have previously purchased in a previous case with TVR? And again, that's 200.403. Predominantly we're going to say no, but it depends on the situation. So you have to really review the case, look at the previous case. And it goes back to eligibility for this last one, which really I know is not what we're talking about today with cost principles, but it goes back to the eligibility, recognizing that there has to be a significant change in the current disability or a new disability in order to be part of the eligibility criteria. If that isn't present, then we shouldn't be working with that individual from a previous case. If they are, then we have to look at those same situations. Why would we be purchasing the same service if there's been a significant change in their disability, which now creates new barriers and impediments to employment? So it's a deeper question than just yes or no on that last one. August, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, as you can see here, without the context of the question, every answer would be it depends. That's why we always need the story attached to your question. There's a participant who wants to do this or that, and we want to be able to purchase this. Well, in context is going to be easier. So take the second bullet point, for example. If a participant is attending a training away from their home, can you pay for food? Well, yeah, it would be included as a part of their per diem as they're attending the training, which is really would be considered maintenance. So yeah, I mean, in that context, if you're going to go out, if a participant says they have no food in their house and they just want a bag of groceries, you'd be very hard pressed to get an approval for that cost because that doesn't specifically align with achieving the vocational goal. Now, a lot of expenditures for this project, for the AIVRS program, is specifically geared towards the achievement of a vocational goal by individuals or indigenous peoples with disabilities. To that end, under Section 103A of the Rehabilitation Act, it does, to paraphrase, say, services are allowable if they are necessary for the individual to achieve their employment outcome. And again, necessary is that legal term. Is there no other way other than the provision of VR services for them to achieve a vocational goal. And like Wayne said, it goes back to the eligibility. Do they have a physical or mental impairment? Is it impeding their or is it an impediment to their employment? Is there a reasonable expectation that they will achieve a vocational goal through VR services? And do they require VR services for them to achieve that vocational goal? When taking a look at the costs of whether they're reasonable, allowable, or allocable, it is always helpful to go back to the basics of, and that would be the eligibility criteria. Is it necessary for them to achieve their vocational goal? And is there no other way for them to achieve their vocational goal except through this service? Now, the other thing you have to take into consideration too is comparable services and benefits, but we're not going to get into that on this call because that's another hour and a half of conversation. So, yeah, I hope that clears up some of this. It all depends on your story and what you're sharing with us and whether or not it meets specific criteria.
Okay, so we got to get to the point where that's always the nasty part. Let's say something does happen, and you do spend money that you shouldn't spend. There is some reimbursement procedures that we have to follow under 2 CFR 204 or 0.411, and you can also look it up under 200.300 through 200.309. Payments made for costs determined to be unallowable by either the federal awarding agency, cognizant agency, or for indirect costs or pass-through entity, either as direct or indirect costs, must be refunded with interest to the federal government in accordance with instructions from the federal agency that determine the costs are unallowable unless federal statute or regulation directs otherwise. So if you do have to pay back money, you have to pay back the money plus interest, and under 2.305B10 through 200.305B11, there's the specific refund methods identified. So funds, principal, and excess cash returns must be directed to the original federal agency payment system. The non-federal entity should review instructions for the original federal agency payment system, and returns should be sent with the information and to the addresses found in. And I didn't want to write down each repayment system, so I just put in the CFR number that has that specific information and the instructions. So it's, you have the project name, project address, and all those things identified in that. So if you ever get in that position, here's the CFR that identify what process you have to follow, what information has to be present when you submit payment in order to do that.
Now, one thing I will say, the practice that we have assumed here at RSA is that if there is an unallowable cost that has been identified and the tribe has paid for it through using grant funds, we will not require you to send a check or money order or electronic payment to one of the addresses provided in 2 CFR 200.305. What we will do, though, is we will ask the tribe to refund those monies from their general account back into the grant, so they just have exactly the same way the tribe draws down funds, they can actually deposit funds the same way. So we would ask them to deposit that amount back into the grant, so that's again usable to the project and not lost money sent back to the treasury, because we don't want to cause undue financial hardship for the project or for the tribe. So it's easier for you to just put that money back into the grant rather than to send it back to the federal or to the Treasury Department. So, and again, like everything we've been saying, it also depends on the story. So if we do find misuse of funds or unallowable costs, well, we will definitely have that conversation with you first before we decide a course of action. We won't just arbitrarily say, nope, got to send it here. We want to hear the story and hopefully resolve the issue without having to involve any remedies for compliance, which is described again in 2 CFR 200. So
Okay, so we've reached the end of the slides. So we're going to jump back into the chat box now and start going through some of the questions that have been posted. And we're also hoping to have time to open up the floor so we can have dialogue and any questions that we have there. So I'm going to go back to a question by Naomi. Some local village stores may have one, and this is referring to the freezer. Some local village stores may have one for sale locally. Do we still need to get the 2 other quotes? And that was based off the conversation we were having about geographic areas.
I think, I mean, if the cost is beyond the $5,000 threshold for equipment, then yes, you would have to get additional quotes. If it's a situation where it's the only equipment available in the village or nearby in any other of the villages that you provide services to, or even in Anchorage or Fairbanks for that matter, then you probably could describe that to your program officer and they would take it under advisement as to whether or not you need the additional quotes. I would say if it's the only thing available anywhere near you that would benefit the individual, I would assume it's for some sort of business enterprise. Then I would think that the program officer would probably approve that. We would also need a statement from the tribe stating that there's no other options available near the tribal service area.
And also along with that, if it's under the $5,000 equipment limit, you would refer back to your policies and procedures of what the tribe requires. If they require the 2 quotes. Because that ties into what Rachel is bringing up in her next question. We have to consider comparable benefits, but not always required to use comparable benefits. Just clarifying, sometimes those comparable benefits take so long to secure and delay progress unreasonably. So that ties into what August was saying about, location and access to those goods and services.
At the very minimum, you really should be following the procurement policies of the tribe. Now, tribes will typically write their policies in accordance with statutory regulatory requirements through the Department of Treasury or any other federal agencies. So they will typically follow those requirements. But as Wayne said, you really should be taking a look at your tribe's procurement policies before making any purchases. And for us at RSA, in order for us to grant approval, I think it would be helpful if the tribe provided some assurance that those policies were followed.
Angie asked, will the cost affect other services to our participants? And Angie, absolutely, because we got to balance our budgets, right? So if we spend a large amount of money in this case for that individualized service, and then we have somebody else come in that requires individualized services, we have to really look at the overall budget. And again, all services are individualized per person, right? So we don't do block services. Not everybody gets tires. Not everybody gets gas allowances. Not everybody gets, babysitting or internet services. It's all individualized for that person's disability needs and their employment goals and what barriers they bring forward towards obtaining and maintaining their employment. So when we look at all those different aspects, it absolutely impacts the services to other participants. And that's why we are always looking for comparable benefits trying to develop a stronger relationship with the state agencies so we can tap into their funding to pay for some of this stuff. It's all a balancing act. Naomi had, oh, I'm sorry, August, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you said it just right. Unfortunately, many of our grantees don't have large consumer service dollar budgets. So you are left to really taking a look at comparable services and benefits before you make an expenditure. But you know, again, if you have a cost like a electric wheelchair that's going to cost you $20,000, and your consumer service dollar budget is $25,000, you may have to definitely take a look for comparable services and benefits to pay for that. So yeah, it definitely, the cost always needs to be kept in your mind, even though the statute states that you cannot put a cap on the amount of money to provide for any given service. 2 CFR 200 does give you room to determine whether or not that cost is reasonable. Would a prudent person in the same situation make that kind of a purchase, given the amount of monies you have available? So, yeah.
Okay, so Naomi brought up another question. Consumer requested to have a freezer purchased from Norvik and shipped to Kiana, which would be an additional cost on top of the product price shipping from Anchorage to Norvik, and then add another shipping charge from Norvik to Kiana. Would that be allowable? They wanted to support a local Norvik tribal store. And this really goes back to that prudent and reasonable, or prudent and reasonable thought process. You would want to break it down. Is it going to cost more to do that versus time, right? So which one's going to be there quicker and that type of thing, and is it going to save you the money? So going back to, would an outside person pay for extra shipping? Maybe not, maybe so. August, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, it definitely depends. Would a prudent person pay for that extra cost or not? Or is this something comparable locally that's less expensive? If this is the only way you can get that, then that's fine. And I would assume if it's to support a local store, that it's specifically tied to a specific individual receiving services. It cannot just be purchased just to help a store. But yeah, it definitely depends on availability and the cost. So again, if it's going to drain your consumer service dollars, then you know you really need to consider how the same goal can, or same expenditure can be accomplished locally, or some alternative can be determined. So it's a tough one because, you know, way out in Western Alaska, it can definitely be extremely difficult to get services, which is why groceries are so expensive out there. Gas is so expensive. So we do understand that, and the context does help us at RSA determine, and we're here to help you to find alternatives too. So we're not here just to say yes or no to you. We do like to discuss the issue and maybe hopefully find alternatives to consider. So
we've got another comment about comparable benefits. After post-COVID, prices have increased significantly for everything, right? I mean, hotel rooms, travel, all of that. And then sometimes doing the comparable benefits do take so much time that we end up losing that opportunity, and it can impact successful case closure. So really it's the quotes. So Naomi also commented on that. We have to make sure the quotes don't expire. Our products may not be available by the time we get all of the quotes in, doing the comparable benefits. And that's one of those struggles that we face all the time. And again, it goes back to like what we talked about earlier, tribal, your policies, your tribal procurement policies, and talking with your program officer. Mike asked, would it all depend on how our grant is written? And I assume that we were talking about, well, Michael, if you're still on, Michael Shaving, maybe you can unmute and just chat with us real quick. Cause you got a couple questions in here.
Yeah, I'm still here. Barely awake.
Right.
But see, like like if it has it in a grant, I mean, it's like who's responsible? Like if we need an update on our monitor, and when we get computers and says no, it's not optical because your monitor's outdated. So would that be a tribal responsibility to replace our monitor, or would that be Voc Rehab a tribal? Would that come out of our budget, or is that the tribal responsibility?
Well, again, it kind of depends on how the grant is written. If the grant is written to provide specific equipment to you as program staff in order for you to do your day-to-day job, then yeah, the cost of a new monitor would come out of the grant. If the tribe contributed the computer equipment to you as a part of in-kind contribution or for the day-to-day operation, then that would be a conversation between the project director and the tribal administration on whether or not the monitors could be updated so they're usable. Now, excuse me. Under 34 CFR 371.21A of the regulations that govern this project, those are called the special application requirements. It does require the tribe to administer the grant in a way that is comparable to the state. Now, when we looked at comparability, we're not looking at you running your VR project identical to the state, but to run it just as effective as the state. And in order for you to do that, you have to have equipment and resources available for you to be able to provide those services adequately and at least comparable to the state. So that would be a conversation your program officer could have with either the project director or the tribal administration regarding the equipment that you're using to provide services to your indigenous with disabilities.
So I have to specifically say, like I don't know, I'm really not administrative, but I had that question because we try to get computers, but they say, well, you know what, that's really not compatible because your monitor is really outdated. We had that monitor ever since like I started working here. That's 2004. So it would all depend on like what the tribe like doesn't the don't or doesn't the Voc Rehab pay the tribe money like to be like part of our grant? Does a percentage go to the tribe for operations?
There is something called indirect cost that the tribes negotiate with the cognizant agency that allows them to charge a certain administrative amount of monies against the grant to pay for specific administrative costs, such as cutting your check, maintaining your timesheet. If you're part of your tribe is located, or if your project is located in a tribal central office, they would charge against specific things like maintenance, which would take out your garbage and things like that. So they can charge against your grant if they have an agreement. Now, for your computer monitors, if the project director has written into their equipment line item, specific equipment for staff, then they could use those funds for that purpose. If they don't, then they can also talk to their program officer about modifying the grant to reallocate specific funds out of any given line item to cover the costs of the computer monitors. So you have equipment that will help you achieve your basically your job, for you to be able to do your job. So again, that would be a conversation with your project director and your program officer, but you can definitely use grant funds for that purpose. But again, you have to have the conversation with your project director and with your program officer.
Okay, yeah, I was just wondering, because, yeah, we run into that, and we have a little conversation, and that's all, that's where it ends. So, I just like, because, getting updated stuff, and then we can't use them. No, because I know our AI guy, Austin, he asked, and I said, well, you can't put that on there because, it doesn't our monitor that. I don't know if they call that a monitor or anything, but the hub, the main thing that kind of monitors all our computers in our workplace. So I'm just curious, what.
Okay. Well, there's any way we can help, let us know. Talk to your project director, and maybe they can get a hold of us here at RSA and we can have that conversation.
Yeah, I'll let Lyle know he's taking a little time off, and I'll ask him. And
All right.
there's another thing I wanted to. I think I had that question before. Is that when you say cost sharing? Yeah, I mean, like, I know when I went to the couple KNRs, they really stress, try to get with the state VR or veterans VR, and you can cost share. And I was a little confused about, when you guys are going through the slides, something about
Mhm.
it's not allowable or refrain from it, or just it kind of confused me.
Yeah, that's two different things, really. When we talk about cost share regarding a grant, we mean that the tribe is going to contribute a certain amount of monies towards the grant so that they can meet their goals and objectives, which is to serve American Indians with disabilities. So the tribe is required to contribute 10% of the total cost of the project. Now, the other thing you're talking about is whether or not a state can contribute towards the cost of a specific individual to achieve their IPE goals. They can do that. That would require the state VR counselor and the TVR counselor to sit down and to take a look at an IBE to determine which costs the tribe will assume and which costs the state will assume. And as long as both the state and the tribe are contributing the core services, which are, eligibility determination, guidance and counseling, trying to get them a job, those specific services, as long as they're both providing that service, they can both claim a successful closure on that individual. But again, like I said, in order for them to do that, they have to negotiate who's going to assume which costs that are associated with that IPE. So I think that's where you're going with, Michael. That's where that cost sharing would
Okay.
come in.
Yeah, that kind of got me confused, because the other part's kind of like administrative, and this one's kind of like services to the consumer. So
Yep,
I
you got it.
I understand now.
All right.
Get it clear.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Michael.
Thank you.
I know we have like a couple minutes left, so
Yeah, Eloise had her hand raised. Would you want to go ahead and go? Or Eloise?
I'll see.
Sorry.
Elsie, you are now known as Eloise.
Uh, Elise. I'm just kidding.
Elise.
No, it was just a question because I know I've heard in the past, like, okay, we're paying an IDC rate for our finance department and they want us to pay for registration fees and such to attend conferences when I've heard before, throughout tribes, our tribal government, like, well, we're paying an IDC rate. Why should we have to pay for the registration and the per diem lodging?
Yeah, usually attendance to a conference or training is not included as a part of indirect cost agreements. That is considered a direct cost, and that would be paid for out of the grant. So, unless it has something to do with for lack of a better way to put it, the background administrative services that tribes provide projects, then it's usually a direct cost. So yeah, the per diem, the travel, the registration fee, those are direct costs that would be charged against the grant and not typically included as a part of an indirect cost agreement.
All right, so we've got,
I'm willing to stay on longer than 2:30 if we want to continue to answer a few more questions. Wayne, that's up to you, whether or not we have that allotted or.
yeah, we've got time. We can continue on. So for those of you that want to stay on and listen to your answers from the questions you've posted and to also be able to participate in dialogue, please do. The next one that we got going on here, I'm sorry, I got kicked all the way to the bottom. All right, so Mike Heron, I do believe the indirect question was answered. All right, so we got the webinar evaluation survey up. Please take that before you take off. If you got to take off. All right,
I assume I can't evaluate myself, or I'm going to give myself like really high scores.
yeah, we took that away from you.
Okay.
Could I ask a question? This is Alfredo with the Ute Mountain Folk Rehab.
Sure.
Okay, my boss isn't here. She's in another training right now. So she asked me to ask, what is the term that we would use to justify outreach material? We know we can't use promotional. So what would the term be that we were to use?
It's not so much a matter of a term to identify those specific items. It's specifically what those items are. And whatever term you sent us, even if it was like mugs, pens, pencils, water bottles, anything of that nature, no matter what name you gave it, we would have to consider that a promotional item. So it's more about what the items are that you're using for outreach more than what you call it. And unfortunately, the way the regs read, anything considered a promotional item would not be allowable. Pamphlets, flyers, things of that nature would be allowable. Anything given out, like a keychain or pencil or pen or anything but the name of the tribe or the VR program on it would be considered promotional. So I know not the easiest answer, but it's more about what the items are than what you call it.
Okay.
Sorry.
All righty, that's fine. I will relay the message to her after I do this webinar evaluation. Who did I speak to?
For evaluations?
No, who's talking to me right now?
Oh, I am August. August.
Oh, okay.
Morrison, yeah.
Oh, your name's right here on top of the thing. All righty, thank you.
And you can tell your project director that the evil RSA man, August Martin, had to give a bad answer.
Okay.
So we got a A request from Rachel. Can you please list the order of the guiding documents for instance, grant proposal, Edgar, Rehab Act, CFRs, and which supersede which in the order, please? And I was thinking about that, August. Maybe we could put that together and send it out in the AWU as kind of a worksheet.
I think that's a good idea. None
Yeah.
of them supersede any other of them. All the statutes and regs really support each other. If you wanting to know which of the previous Edgars and regulations were incorporated into 2 CFR 200, then that's a different question. But as far as I know, uh, none of the regulations or statutes supersede each other. They all support each other or further explain something that's statutorily required or regulatorily required. So I think that's answered your question. I know the old OMB Circular A87 was incorporated into 2 CFR 200. And there are a number of other regulations that were incorporated. So otherwise, they're all meant to support each other.
Okay, so we'll work on that and get that put out in the AWU as well. Tricia, you have your hand raised?
Yes, thank you. Hello. I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I just want to make sure I understand. In regards to, I know we can't pay court fines and all of that, and I just, a DUI class that is separate in order to get your license back through the California DMV, that's different than a court fine. Can we pay for that if it also has a component where they do their DUI course and then they also do like where they have to go to AA classes, which is usually how we do it in California. They do their DUI classes and then they do their AA classes and then they can get their license back. I know it's like case by case, and if it's for, say, a client who needs their license back because they work in construction and in San Diego, you know, it's hard to get around town if you don't have a vehicle. You can't. It's just a little more challenging. Would that be would that be an appropriate use of funds? Thank you.
Well, I think because the DUI classes are imposed by the court system, then it would be considered part of a court cost or a penalty or a fee. So unfortunately, in the context in which you described it, we probably would have to say that's not an allowable cost. But again, if you want to take a look at other costs that your individual is assuming under their IPE and cover those costs to, so that frees up resources for them to pay for the DUI classes. There's nothing that would prohibit you from doing that. I would encourage you to actually take a look at that, but unfortunately, because DUI classes are court imposed, then they would not be an allowable cost. And I'm sure I'm going to get hit by a whole ton of questions from that one.
All right, so
We,
Mary asked, can the local match be used to purchase unallowable items such as pens with project name for outreach events?
No, because the matching requirement, the cost share matching requirement, is specifically contributed to this grant, and any funds that are contributed to this grant fall under the guidance of the statutory and regulatory requirements, which is, you know, for this program, the Rehabilitation Act, the 34 CFR 371 regulations, 2 CFR 200, the Uniform Administrative Requirements, Edgar. So it would fall under those. So now the matching funds that are contributed from the tribe could not be used for unallowable costs either.
Yeah.
Now our whole goal, our whole purpose at RSA is to help you to alleviate or not be found in non-compliance towards statutory regulatory requirements that would end up in an audit finding when you conduct your single audits. We want to protect you from those single audits, make sure that you're in compliance with all the statute and regs So our job really is to help you not just do your job as to the best ability as you can, but also to help you avoid some of those findings that could require us to put you into a corrective action plan. So we do want to help you to get your job done. But we also want to protect you from those findings. And to that end, when we say something is unallowable, it's usually one, it doesn't match or meet up with the statutory regulatory requirements. And two, we definitely want to protect you from having an audit finding. Heather
Okay,
has her hand up.
yeah, Heather McKinney, and then we'll go to Elise. She had her hand up also.
Yes, I wanted to touch back on the reinstatement fees. They've already paid all their fines and everything. But as far as the reinstatement fee go, I know I've talked to you about that before, August. How do you feel about that one?
If it's necessary for them to achieve the vocational goal,
Okay,
they've already paid for all their court costs and fines and penalties and fees. And the only thing keeping them from achieving their vocational goal is their reinstatement of their license. If
well,
there's any way you can assume other costs to free up resources for them to pay for that on their own, that might be the best option. Otherwise, I don't think that it would be unallowable. Because again, it is necessary for them to achieve their vocational goal. But like you said, they paid for everything else, their court
Right.
costs, penalties. And I think in this instance, I don't think it would be an issue.
okay. And
Again,
also,
just to protect yourself, I would look at freeing up his resources. These are her resources first. By looking at other costs associated with their IPE and assuming those, so they can pay for the restatement on their own. Otherwise, if there's no other way, if there's just no other option, then I think it would be allowed.
okay. And I know you were talking about the budget on there. If we are given more than what we're required share of the funds, can we use the additional funds any way we want to?
I mean, within the statute and regs, yeah. Now, when a tribe submits a grant application, they include as a part of their budget the cost share requirement, and each tribe has the option to provide exactly the 10% of the total cost, which is taking the amount of the federal award they're requesting, dividing it by 9, and the result is their required matching requirement. If they choose to contribute more than that 10%, so if a person is requesting $400,000 from the federal government, you divide that by 9, you get 50,000. So they're going to contribute $50,000 towards the total cost of the project. If they choose to contribute 80,000, then that additional 30,000 still has to be spent in a way that follows the statutory and regulatory requirements. Does that answer your question?
So would that be, I mean, the only way you could get around that is if they put it in a separate line or a separate budget?
No, the only way they could get around is if they use general funds to pay for an item and then contribute that item to the tribe. And it would not be counted towards match, but it would just be a contribution towards the project. So if you're looking at promotional items, if the
Yes.
tribe wanted to use their general funds to pay for cups, pens, pencils, water bottles, what have you, as long as they're not considering that contribution as a part of match and just a contribution to the tribe, they could do that. But they could not use matching funds, or they could not contribute those promotional items as a part of match. No.
Well, I was talking about part of the match. I didn't know because if the tribe gives me my match and then additional monies, I was just wondering if I could use those additional monies in any way that I
No.
wanted to.
If it's for project purposes, then no, you still have to follow the statutory and regulatory requirements with those monies.
Okay,
Yeah, sorry about that.
Right.
that's all right. Thank you.
Elise? I saw you yawning, so I had to call on you.
Well, I was just wondering because I think we're all interested in, this promotional item stuff, but I was like, okay, so you can't attach the tribal logo, you can't attach tribal VR information. Same with the logo.
Mhm.
What if you had a saying that associated with your VR program? I'm trying here.
I like the way you think.
Wayne, you take that one. If you have a what associated?
Like a saying, like a vision or a mission.
Logan, I think she's talking about us.
No, I mean, it's about the item itself. If you had pencils or pens along with pads of paper in a folder or a what do you call those leather folders or whatever, and it didn't have anything tribal associated with it, and you needed it for the individual needed it for them to take notes and to achieve their vocational goal, as long as those items didn't have any logos or any association with the tribe, then yes, you could do that. But water bottles, pens, pencils, anything like keychains, things like that would be considered promotional if it had the logo on it, or even just a water bottle. Yeah, I mean, a water bottle, how is that helping an individual achieve their vocational goal? So that would be a promotional item, whether you had the tribe's logo on it or not. It's still promotion. So yeah, I see where you're looking for the loopholes. I'm all about loopholes myself, but unfortunately, this one is pretty cut and dry.
All right, thanks, Elise. Emma? Or Diana, sorry. Whoever you want to be today. You're muted.
Wait,
Yeah, Diana, you are muted, so we can't hear a word you're
Okay,
saying.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yeah,
So my question was basically just kind of off of Heather's, but August went ahead and answered that. We contribute more than the 10% too, but I thought once that money is a match money, it becomes federal dollars, has to be spent the same way as the federal dollars.
Exactly.
Okay.
Said so much more precisely than I said it. Nicely done.
So I also have another question. You said something earlier about giving per diem to clients so they could get a meal when we send them for training or testing or something. How would we do that? Because we can't put money in clients' hands.
For travel, if they're traveling to a training or something to that effect, as long as they come back with receipts, yeah, you can. I mean, there's no other way that you can handle per diem. Whether or not you want to provide them the money or you want to reimburse them. But in my experience, most tribal members don't have just extra money lying around where they can, and I think it's our responsibility when we as a VR project send an individual to either an assessment or to a training that's outside of their community and they have to stay the night or whatever. Yeah, I think it's our responsibility to take care of them. So, per diem can definitely go in their hands. But again, making sure that you hold them accountable, I would say you come back with receipts of the meals that you use that per diem for. And, if they use that per diem to pay for, I don't know, a tour or going to a show or something, that's just money they can't use to eat. And, lesson learned, if you have to send them out again, then you're probably not going to give that money to them. And you're going to require them to reimburse it. But again, that's a case by case basis. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you, August.
okay, so real quick, I see Rachel's hand. August, what do you think about taking Rachel's question and then we answer the chat box and I'll post it on the website under the FAQs?
I think that's a good idea.
Okay, so Rachel will take your question. I see your hand raised, and then we'll close down the webinar, and August and I will work on answering the questions out of the chat box, and then we'll send that out in a email blast once it's posted on the website.
Thank you, Wayne. My question is just, can we please get that in writing? It's been my understanding in the past that we've discussed that the states are able to do that, but it was my understanding that the tribal VRs were not able to pay funds directly to consumers. So I would like to see if we can get that confirmed from either something posted by AverTech saying it's with RSA guidance, so that we can bring that to our tribal administration and advocate for that change on our end.
Yeah, I think we could definitely do that. But Rachel, again, it is contextual. In the context in which we're talking about this, we're talking about saying an individual away from their community to a separate location. We already bought them a plane ticket. And the only way, in my opinion, that you can get per diem funds into that person's hand is to give them that per diem money. But again, I would strongly recommend you as a project director to implement specific policies that require those participants to come back with receipts showing how those funds were used specifically for per diem purposes. I would follow GSA guidelines. GSA has specific guidelines on their website as to how much per diem is for each community or location. I would get on there and follow that. And I would implement specific requirements on them when they are traveling. But yes, I think we can definitely get something in writing regarding that. And it'll be in the context of the question that was asked.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Okay, we got 2 minutes, and Naomi just raised her hand, so let's take Naomi real quick.
I was just going to ask if the PowerPoint was going to be emailed to us, or do we need to go to the website?
We'll post this recording to our YouTube channel as regular, and then we will have a folder with the materials available. I don't know if we're going to send it out in an email. Maybe we'll send it out in an email, but you have to do the survey before you get the PowerPoint. I'm not sure what evil plan we have, but we'll get the information available at some point, whether it's the website or we email it out.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, August, for co-facilitating with me and carrying the heavy load, answering all the questions.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me here. I really appreciate all the questions. And from my standpoint, I really do appreciate all of you who are out in the front lines providing services to our Indigenous peoples with disabilities. Given the economies and the conditions of many of our reservations and service areas, we do recognize that it is a difficult task. But every year, you all surprise us by continuing to meet or exceeding your goals and objectives. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate that. Even if you don't receive our appreciation either through the emails or through our conference calls, I do want you to know that we do appreciate all of your efforts, and we know that they're not in vain and that you are helping so many people out there. So as an Alaska Native myself and a person with a disability, I can't tell you how much I appreciate all the sacrifices you all make every day to serve your own tribal members. So in the words of my people, Gunashish, thank you very much.
Thank you both, and thank you everyone for all the questions.